My mother-in-law said, "You're just temporary." I tried to smile, tried to fit in, but her words haunted me. I stayed quiet, endured her tests, and slowly built my place in her family. Months later, when she finally acknowledged me, I realized I was permanent. It was my first dinner at their house. I'd been dating Julia for almost a year, and we'd been careful her parents weren't exactly warm to strangers. But I thought I'd built some trust. Apparently, I was wrong. Temporary. That word kept looping in my mind on the drive home. Temporary. Like a visitor, a guest. Not someone who belonged. Not someone who deserved a seat at the table. I was supposed to be family. I had planned my life with Julia. We had plans, dreams, shared rents, even a dog named Max. But for her, I was nothing more than a placeholder. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe I'd misunderstood the tone. But that night, in the quiet of my apartment, I replayed it over and over. I could almost hear her smirk. Temporary. She had meant it. The next few weeks were tense. Every visit, every conversation, I felt that judgment like a shadow. Her eyes scanned me like she was testing how long I'd last. I tried to be perfect, laugh at her jokes, compliment the decor, pretend I didn't notice the cold stares. But it only made me smaller, quieter. Julia noticed, of course. One evening, curled up on the couch with Max at our feet, she said, "You know, she doesn't really like you." I wanted to argue. It's not that bad. But deep down, I knew she was right. Temporary wasn't just an insult, it was a prophecy in her eyes. "You don't have to put up with it," Julia whispered. She traced patterns on my arm like she was trying to comfort me and herself at the same time. I want him to last, I thought. I want him to be my husband. I swallowed hard. I wanted to protect her from the venom of her own mother. But protecting her didn't stop the venom from spilling over me. Then came the first big fight. I'll never forget it. We were at a family brunch, one of those painfully polite gatherings where everyone pretends they're happy. I tried to make small talk with her, about the new house she'd bought, her garden, anything. But she cornered me. "You know, Julia's probably smarter than you think," she said. "But I don't know how long she'll put up with someone like you. You're temporary." I saw red. My chest tightened. I wanted to explode, to shout, to tell her exactly what I thought. Instead, I smiled. Smiled because I didn't want to ruin Julia's day. Smiled while every word lodged in my heart like a knife. Temporary. I went home that night and stared at the ceiling. I couldn't shake it. I couldn't forget it. Every moment with her, every glance, every innocent comment, it all carried the weight of her verdict. And then, the idea hit me. If she thought I was temporary, maybe it was time to become permanent, not just for Julia, but for me. I wouldn't let her define my place in my own life. It started small. I began asserting myself in conversations, gently at first. I refused to laugh at jokes I didn't find funny. I stopped apologizing for things I hadn't done. Julia noticed the change immediately. "You're different," she said one night, her voice a mix of awe and concern. "I'm just done pretending," I replied. She smiled softly, the way she does when she's proud but also worried. And I realized then that I wasn't doing this to spite her mother, I was doing it to survive. To claim my space in the life I was building. Things escalated quickly after that. I started noticing other patterns, little manipulations and tests. She would invite me over, then pretend to forget important details, my favorite dishes, my allergies, even Max's routine. She would make offhand comments like, "Oh, I didn't think you would understand that," in front of other family members, watching me squirm. I wanted to lash out every time, but I stayed calm. Patience is power, I reminded myself. I realized that the moment I reacted, I'd give her control, and I wasn't giving her control anymore. The turning point came about 6 months later. Julia had invited me over to help organize some old family photos in the attic. I didn't know it yet, but her mother had been planning a test. "You're going through the wrong box," she said sharply when I picked one up. I didn't flinch. "Maybe, but I'll figure it out." She raised an eyebrow, like she was daring me. I ignored her. And then I saw it, a stack of letters tied with a ribbon, addressed to Julia's father, but the postmarks went back decades. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened one. It was full of confessions, her anger, her insecurities, her manipulations. She had written about controlling Julia's life, trying to mold her into the perfect daughter, resenting every man who got close to her. And then, I read something that made my blood run cold. "The next one won't stay. He'll never last. Temporary, all of them." I closed the letter slowly, my hands shaking. That's when I realized. She hadn't just said it to me. She said it to every man Julia had ever dated. I wasn't the first, and maybe I wouldn't be the last, but I wasn't going to be temporary. When I confronted her later that evening, I did it differently than I expected. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked her in the eye and said, "I'm not temporary, and I'm not leaving." Her face twisted, a mixture of surprise and irritation. "You think you can change things?" "I don't want to change anything," I said. "I want to exist. Here, with Julia, permanently." Julia, standing behind me, reached for my hand. That was the first time I felt a true shift, the subtle power moving away from her mother and into my hands, quietly but irrevocably. From that day on, I stayed consistent. I didn't play her games. I didn't react to her provocations. Slowly, I built my place in the family not through arguments, but through persistence, patience, and presence. Months later, during another tense family dinner, she made the mistake of calling me temporary again. I just smiled. "Funny," I said, "because here I am." Her jaw tightened. Julia squeezed my hand under the table, and I realized I had won, not by humiliating her, not by revenge, but by simply staying, by being permanent when she expected me to vanish. I learned a lot through it about patience, about silent strength, about the ways people try to control love. But more than anything, I learned that permanence isn't given, it's claimed. And sometimes, the people who try to make you feel like a guest are the ones who teach you to become family. After that night, the tension didn't evaporate, it simmered. Every interaction with her became a quiet war. But now, I wasn't fighting to survive. I was fighting to exist, and oddly enough, it felt liberating. The first major test came during the holidays. Julia's parents insisted on a full family gathering, with cousins, aunts, and enough awkward small talk to fill a year. Her mother cornered me almost immediately. "You really think you belong here?" she asked, her voice sharp but low enough that only I could hear. I froze for a fraction of a second, then smiled, calm as a stone. "I don't think. I know." Her eyes narrowed, scanning me like she was recalculating. She didn't expect that. Nobody did. The day passed in tense politeness. Every time she tried a jab, I responded with quiet, almost imperceptible confidence. At one point, she made a snide comment about my job, something about how it wasn't serious enough. But instead of snapping, I laughed. Not sarcastically, not bitterly, just laughed. The kind of laugh that carries peace inside it. Julia leaned over mid-laughter, whispering, "You're doing it. You're really doing it." I nodded, not taking my eyes off her mother. "I am permanent. You're just background noise now." Weeks went by. Slowly, the family began to shift. Her father, who had always been quiet and polite, started making small gestures toward me, asking for my opinion, including me in plans. Her siblings, who had been polite but distant, started inviting me to lunch or a coffee. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was happening. I was no longer temporary. And then came the moment that changed everything. Julia's mother made a huge mistake, one she probably didn't even know she was making. She tried to sabotage our weekend getaway, claimed Julia needed to stay behind to help with some emergency at home. But I had anticipated her move. Julia and I had planned for months, and nothing she said could stop us. "You can't just leave," she hissed as we packed the car. "I can," I said calmly. "And we are." She looked furious, but powerless. For once, the power she had wielded for decades didn't work. It was intoxicating. This is what it feels like to be permanent, I thought. The weekend was perfect. No interruptions, no judgment, no petty tests. Just Julia, me, and Max exploring the woods, and laughing until our sides hurt. And every time I looked at Julia, I felt that unspoken gratitude. She finally saw me as someone unshakable, someone steady in her life. When we returned, her mother tried to act normal, but the cracks were obvious. She couldn't manipulate the dynamic anymore. And one evening, I caught her alone, staring at old family photos. Her face softened, almost imperceptibly. "You've changed," she said quietly. I paused, measuring my words. "I didn't change, I just stayed." Her eyes flickered, somewhere between shame and recognition. For the first time, I saw a hint of respect, or maybe it was just realization that I wasn't leaving. From then on, the battles became less frequent. She tried once or twice to throw subtle jabs, but I had learned her rhythm. I didn't react. I didn't give her satisfaction. And slowly, the rest of the family started to treat me as part of the circle, not just an outsider. It wasn't easy. Every victory was quiet, almost invisible. But over time, it became undeniable. I had claimed my space, my permanence. And it wasn't about proving anything to her. It was about proving it to myself and to Julia. The next big turning point came unexpectedly. Julia's mother invited me to help with a charity event her club was organizing. I had never been involved in anything like that before, but I agreed. The event was a mess of last-minute details, volunteers who didn't show up, and problems I had to fix on the fly. But I stayed calm. I organized, delegated, and executed. By the end of the day, she pulled me aside. You actually did really well," she admitted. Her voice was hesitant, almost awkward. I nodded. "I've been doing well all along. You just didn't notice." Her face softened again, just slightly, the edges of her armor cracking. And in that moment, I realized something profound. I didn't need her approval, but her recognition. It was surprisingly satisfying. After that, our relationship shifted subtly. She stopped making cruel comments in front of Julia. She didn't invite me over to test me. The Cold War became a quiet truce, and even though she would never openly admit it, I knew she finally accepted me not as a temporary placeholder, but as a permanent part of their lives. The real victory, though, wasn't just in her acknowledgement. It was in the way Julia's family as a whole started to include me. Her father and I would talk about sports. Her siblings invited me to game nights, and even the extended family started asking me questions, valuing my opinions. The invisible boundary I had felt for so long had finally dissolved, and through it all, Julia was there. She had watched the transformation, the quiet battles, the victories won not with shouting but with persistence. She squeezed my hand more often, smiled more freely, and sometimes, in the middle of a conversation, whispered, "I love you for this." It was in those moments I realized, permanence isn't about winning arguments or forcing recognition. It's about showing up, consistently, without letting fear or doubt dictate your actions. It's about living your truth, even when someone tries to define you otherwise. One evening, months later, her mother approached me again. I braced myself for another jab, but instead, she said, "I underestimated you." I smiled, almost gently. "That's okay. Happens to the best of us." And that was it. No grand apologies, no dramatic confessions, just quiet acknowledgement. And for me, that was enough. I had become permanent, and nothing she could say would ever change that. In the end, I realized the irony. She had said, "You're just temporary, trying to diminish me." But in doing so, she pushed me to fight for my place, to assert myself, and to show what permanence really looks like. I didn't lose her that day. I gained clarity, strength, and the unshakable knowledge that some words are meant to ignite your persistence, not define your worth. Sometimes, the people who try to make you feel small end up teaching you how to stand tall. Life settled into a rhythm I hadn't thought possible. Julia and I grew closer than ever, and the tension with her mother had shifted from hostility to uneasy acceptance. But as much as I wanted to believe the battle was over, life had a way of testing persistence. It was a quiet Sunday morning when the next challenge appeared. Julia and I were making pancakes in our tiny kitchen, Max sprawled at our feet, the sunlight cutting through the blinds just right. Her mother called, casually, almost innocently, asking if Julia could come over later to help with some family matter. I knew that tone, the one that said, "I'm still testing you." I smiled at Julia. "Want me to come along?" She shook her head. "No, I'll handle it. You've done enough." I knew she meant well, but I insisted. "I'm going." Together, later that afternoon, we arrived. Her mother greeted us with that same tight-lipped politeness, but this time, there was no smirk, no hidden edge, just a challenge she hadn't fully prepared for. "You're early," she said. "On time," I replied, calm and steady. She led us into the study, a room cluttered with old papers, family records, and stacks of books she never seemed to touch. The tension was palpable. I could feel it coiling in her like a spring, waiting for a crack in my composure. But there wasn't one. Julia excused herself, leaving me alone with her mother. "I need to talk to you," she said, voice low, deliberate. I nodded. "I'm listening." There was a long pause, the kind that makes you wonder if silence will break first. Then she spoke. "I've been hard on you," she admitted. The words were awkward, hesitant, as if admitting them drained something from her. I thought you wouldn't last, that you'd leave her, like the others. I didn't trust anyone around Julia." I stayed quiet. Let her words land. Finally, I thought. The walls are cracking. I've said things. Terrible things, she continued, eyes avoiding mine. And maybe I didn't give you a chance. I took a breath, steady and measured. You didn't. But I stayed. I didn't leave. And I never will. I'm permanent not because of what you think, but because of what I know. I belong here. Her eyes flickered, a mixture of relief and something harder to define. Respect, maybe. Fear, maybe. Acceptance, finally. She started, then stopped. The words fell into silence again, heavy and uncertain. I could feel the shift. She didn't need to finish the sentence. I already understood. It was a turning point, not just in my relationship with her, but in my own understanding of strength. I realized then that permanence isn't about confrontation. It's about showing up, consistently, without letting someone else define your worth. Months passed. Each small victory was quiet but undeniable. Family dinners became less about testing and more about genuine interaction. I wasn't a guest anymore, I was part of the framework. Her father would ask my opinion first. Julia's siblings included me in plans without hesitation, and even the extended family started treating me as one of their own. Through it all, Julia never wavered. She watched me navigate the delicate balance of patience, strength, and presence. She'd squeeze my hand during a conversation, her eyes shining with unspoken gratitude. "You're doing it," she seemed to say. "You're permanent." The real validation came one evening during a quiet family gathering. Her mother was there, naturally, but this time, she didn't corner me. Instead, she watched from a distance, observing, calculating, but no longer trying to control. "You've changed," she said quietly, pulling me aside. "I didn't change," I said softly. "I stayed." Her lips pressed together, and I saw a fleeting flicker of acknowledgement acceptance. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. Enough to know that my place in Julia's family was no longer in question. And then came the moment I had been waiting for, one I didn't realize was coming until it happened. Julia's mother asked for my advice on a personal matter, something deeply sensitive, something she had never shared with anyone outside the family. I listened carefully, offered guidance, and she actually considered it. It was surreal. The woman who had once called me temporary was now seeking my counsel. I realized that permanence isn't about proving someone wrong, it's about proving yourself right, quietly, consistently, until they can no longer ignore the truth. Over the next year, the relationship with her mother continued to evolve. She never fully apologized for her past behavior, but she didn't need to. Actions spoke louder than words. She began including me in family traditions, asking for input, and even defending me when others tried to undermine me. Through all of this, I learned an important lesson. The people who try to define you by their fears, insecurities, or expectations are not your enemy, they're your challenge. And meeting that challenge doesn't mean fighting fire with fire. It means standing firm, showing up, and refusing to let their perception dictate your reality. Julia and I continued to grow together, stronger than ever. Our bond was fortified not just by love, but by the trials we had endured. I realized that my permanence in her life and in her family wasn't just about me. It was about the life we were building together, the trust we had nurtured, and the resilience we had developed. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching Max chase fireflies, Julia leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I'm proud of you." I smiled, feeling the weight of every challenge, every insult, every test that had led us here. "I didn't do it for pride," I said. "I did it for us." She smiled softly. "It's still yours." And in that moment, I understood that permanence isn't given. It's earned, moment by moment, choice by choice, day after day. And sometimes, the people who try to make you feel temporary are the very ones who teach you how to become permanent. I glanced toward her mother, who was watching us from the window, a quiet, reflective expression on her face. There was no smirk, no judgment, just observation. And I realized something else. She had changed too, not entirely, but enough to recognize that her attempts to control and diminish me had failed. Sometimes, the hardest victories are the quietest. The next year was quieter, but in a way that felt monumental. Life wasn't about constant battles anymore. It was about small victories, moments that confirmed I truly belonged. Julia and I had settled into a rhythm, balancing work, our small apartment, Max's endless energy, and the occasional family dinner this time, without the tension that had once defined every interaction. Her mother, though still sharp and opinionated, had softened. I could see it in subtle ways. The way she asked for my opinion on household matters, how she included me when she made plans for Julia, and even the rare compliment she would slip into conversation when she thought I wasn't looking. I could feel her respect, grudging but real. The ultimate test, however, came when Julia and I decided to take the next step, buying a house. We had been renting for years, moving around, building our life together in bits and pieces. When we found a modest house with a small yard for Max, we were ecstatic. But when we told her mother, I braced myself. "I hope you know what you're doing," she said flatly. Julia rolled her eyes, already knowing I'd handle it with calm persistence. "I do," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "And we want you to know that we hope you'll be part of our life here, as family." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and I could almost see her thinking, permanent. He really means it. We moved in over the next few weeks. The house was ours, our first true claim to permanence, and for the first time, her mother had no leverage, no tests to throw at us. I took every small chore seriously: painting, fixing leaks, organizing, even the landscaping. She visited once, noticed my work, and didn't complain. It was a subtle acknowledgement, but it meant the world. One afternoon, a month after moving in, she pulled me aside. I expected the usual subtle challenge, but instead, she said something I never thought I'd hear. "You've done more than I expected. You stayed. You didn't run when things got difficult. You're permanent." It wasn't an apology, not entirely, but it was recognition, and that's all I needed. Over time, even the extended family began to see me differently. I was no longer the temporary outsider. I was part of the rhythm. Birthdays, holidays, Sunday dinners, they included me naturally, without hesitation. Her father would ask for my advice first. Her siblings invited me without prompting, and even cousins who had once ignored me began reaching out. Through all of this, Julia was my anchor. She had watched every step, every moment of subtle triumph, and she never doubted me. She'd squeeze my hand during dinners, whisper encouragement during tense moments, and remind me that persistence pays off. "You're permanent," she would say quietly, and it became a mantra I carried with me. One evening, we hosted a family gathering at our new house. It was the first time I felt truly at ease. Her mother arrived, naturally, but she didn't corner me, didn't test me. She moved through the room with quiet observation, occasionally nodding when she saw how we managed everything together. "You've done well," she said later, pulling me aside in the kitchen. I nodded, calm and steady. "I've just stayed. That's all it took." Her eyes softened, something between acknowledgement and respect. "I underestimated you. But you're here. You belong." That was the moment I realized how far we had come. The woman who had once told me I was temporary had, in her own way, confirmed my permanence, not with apologies or grand gestures, but through quiet observation, grudging acknowledgement, and the absence of conflict. Julia and I watched Max chase fireflies that night, the yard alive with soft summer light. I held her hand and felt a sense of completion I hadn't known before. We had built something together, a life, a family, a permanence that no words or judgments could shake. And in that moment, I understood something important. Permanence isn't about winning arguments or proving someone wrong. It's about showing up, consistently, without letting fear or doubt dictate your actions. It's about living your truth, moment by moment, choice by choice, until your presence becomes undeniable. Her mother, I realized, had been the unexpected teacher. Her words, her tests, her attempts to diminish me, they had forced me to grow, to assert myself, to claim my place in a life I believed in. Without her resistance, I might have stayed complacent, quiet, temporary. Sometimes, the people who try to make you feel small end up teaching you how to stand tall. Months passed, and life settled into a steady rhythm. We celebrated our first Christmas in our house, her mother helping with the cooking, not testing me this time, just participating. I watched her from across the room, noticing the subtle shifts, the way she no longer spoke over me, the way she included me naturally in conversations, the rare, almost imperceptible nod of approval. I thought about all the moments that had brought us here. The first dinner, the cruel words, the tests and jabs, the letters, the quiet victories, the patience, the persistence. Every moment had built toward this, a life where I belonged, where Julia and I could build our future without fear of judgment. One night, Julia and I sat on the porch after everyone had left. The lights of the house behind us, Max asleep at our feet. We held hands in silence. I realized I had never felt so secure, so permanent, in anything in my life. Not a job, not a friendship, not even my own family of origin had given me this. This was ours, and we had claimed it together. "I love you," Julia said softly, leaning her head on my shoulder. "I love you too," I replied, feeling the weight of every trial, every insult, every challenge we had endured. "And I'm here to stay, permanently." And that was it. The battle was over, not with fireworks or confrontations, but with quiet, steadfast presence. Sometimes, that's the most powerful way to win. The following year was peaceful, but not without its quiet tests. Life has a way of reminding you that permanence isn't static. It requires constant presence, patience, and integrity. But by now, I had learned the rhythm. I no longer reacted to her mother's veiled critiques or sharp comments. I simply existed, calmly, steadily, in a space I had earned. Julia and I had started planning our wedding. Not a grand, extravagant event, but something intimate, meaningful. The house we shared would become the center of our family's new chapter. I invited her mother to help with the preparations, unsure of what her response would be. To my surprise, she agreed hesitantly, at first, but she agreed. She offered ideas, critiques, and suggestions. Nothing harsh, nothing condescending, just participation. She even smiled occasionally, a subtle, rare gesture that made me realize how far things had come. The day of the rehearsal dinner, I noticed her mother watching me quietly. She didn't approach, didn't speak. She just observed. I caught her eye for a moment, and she gave a small nod. It wasn't a proclamation, not a declaration of friendship or approval. It was something subtler. Recognition, acceptance. And in that moment, I realized something important. Permanence isn't about convincing someone else to like you or respect you. It's about claiming your place through consistency, integrity, and love. Her words could no longer shape my reality. My actions had, my presence had, my life with Julia had. The wedding itself was a quiet, beautiful affair. Her mother walked Julia down the aisle, a symbolic gesture that once would have been impossible. I stood at the altar, feeling a sense of calm I had never known. The years of subtle battles, quiet victories, and personal growth had led to this. I was here. I was permanent. During the reception, her mother pulled me aside again. For a moment, I braced myself for a comment, a jab, or a test. But instead, she said simply, "You belong here. You've earned it. You've been permanent." No smirk, no sarcasm, just acknowledgement. And somehow, that meant more than any grand apology could have. I smiled. "Thank you. That's all I wanted." It wasn't about pride, or winning, or proving her wrong. It was about being present, being true, and refusing to leave. After the wedding, life continued as it always does, ordinary, messy, filled with small challenges and joys. But through it all, I carried a quiet confidence, an unshakable knowledge that I had claimed my space. My place in Julia's life, in her family, and in our shared world was real, unmovable. I was permanent. Looking back, I realized that her mother's words, "You're just temporary," were never meant to empower me. But they did. They ignited a determination I didn't know I had. Every challenge, every subtle insult, every test became a building block, a step toward something lasting. Sometimes, the people who try to make you feel small end up teaching you how to stand tall. They show you the strength you didn't know you possessed, the resilience you would have ignored, the courage that waits quietly inside until circumstances force it out. Julia and I often sit together on our porch in the evenings, watching the sky turn shades of pink and gold. Max dozes at our feet. I squeeze her hand and feel the weight of everything we've endured. I think about the years of tension, the fights, the subtle victories, the moments of doubt. And I realize, without a doubt, that every step was worth it. Her mother has become part of our lives, not perfectly, not without complexity, but in a way that feels authentic. We have learned to coexist, to respect boundaries, and to accept each other's humanity. And in doing so, I have discovered something profound. Permanence isn't granted. It's earned, cultivated, and claimed. Sometimes, closure isn't peace, it's distance. Sometimes, victory isn't loud, it's quiet, steadfast, and unshakable. And sometimes, the people who try to make you feel temporary are the ones who teach you how to become permanent. I didn't lose her that day I first heard those words. I found myself. And in the end, that's the most permanent thing of all.